Hello, nerds! Welcome to the Geek Girls Story Salon, where I talk to creatives from across disciplines and across the world about the art of storytelling. I'm your host, Jen Jackalone, lifelong storyteller and head geek in charge. We've got some great guests in the coming weeks, including Jasmine Truesdale of AZA Comics and science and nature communicator Stephanie Martin. So if you're not already following us, smash that like and subscribe button to stay up to date on the heaping helpings of brain food coming your way, courtesy of our partners, fleetoffandoms.com and Ilva Publishing. My guest today is an insanely prolific master of horror comics, both original and with established IPs. You may have read his work on the Venomverse comics, but if you haven't checked out The Last Book You'll Ever Read or Harrow County, you're missing out. Welcome to the show, Cullen Bunn.
Hey there, how are you?
Awesome. I've been really psyched to talk to you. I want to say thanks for being here because Harrow County is no joke. It's one of my favorite new comics of the last 5 years.
Oh, well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
So I wanted to actually, I guess I'll start by mentioning I actually had Clay McLeod Chapman on a few weeks ago.
Oh, yeah.
And we spent a fair bit of time fangirling about your work. In fact, he referred to himself as the White Lion to your Guns N' Roses, which I think is pretty high praise. So I hope he doesn't.
I'll accept that. I have not heard that, but I'll accept it. I like it.
I hope he doesn't mind me sharing that. But one thing that we talked about a little bit is why horror is his chosen playground. And I'd like to ask you about that as well. What is it about this genre that lets you kind of tell the stories you tell?
I think about it a lot, and I'm not sure I have a great answer. I have an answer. It's just I don't know if it's the great answer, and I don't know if it'll change the next time somebody asks me. But this is, first of all, I feel comfortable writing horror. I enjoy it. I feel like these are the kind of stories I want to tell because they're the kind of stories I would want to read. I also I feel like horror is a very broad genre. I can do a lot of different things under that umbrella. But I also feel like, in a weird way, horror is kind of for me, a hopeful genre. And what I mean by that is, I read these stories or watch these movies or whatever, and even when these characters are going through these awful, awful situations, I like that they're trying. I like that they're fighting to survive, and they might not make it, but I like that they tried. I like that they put up a fight. And to me, there's a sense of hopefulness there. And, I know some people say, well, it's cathartic. You're exercising your own demons when you face these terrible things that you're writing. And yeah, to some degree, but at the base of all that is this hope that maybe there's a way to fight against these things.
Rage against the dying of the light and all that.
That's
yeah.
right, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and it makes me feel like, maybe I should, these characters in these stories are facing unimaginable dread and terror. Maybe it's not so bad when the coffee shop is out of almond milk, If that's the worst thing that happens to me, I'll be all right.
Right. Yeah, perspective.
Right.
I guess that's a good thing. Which is, I think, why every horror writer I've ever talked to has just been such a really lovely, chill, relaxed human being. I think
maybe that's it, because I would agree. The horror community is super chill, super relaxed, super welcoming. It's I remember going to some of my first conventions when I was trying to become, trying to be a professional, trying to get work published. And I remember going to the World Horror Convention years and years ago and being terrified to walk into that hotel with all these established horror writers. And I remember walking in and a horror writer just goes, "Hey, Cullen, come on over." And it was so welcoming, and I'll never forget it. I'll never, look, there are good people and bad people in every genre and every medium, but the horror genre is always going to have a special place in my heart, and that's one of the reasons.
Yeah. One thing it's interesting because I've only really sort of recently kind of gotten into reading horror. Like I had a brief period in high school where I read some Stephen King because that's what everybody was doing.
Right.
Um, and but I got away from it and I didn't actually become interested in it until after I had been a writer myself for a while. Because it's sort of like, it's just an interesting lens. Like I think a lot about like metaphor and like what sort of the overarching metaphors are. And sometimes when I'm reading horror, like it really kind of jumps out. Um, what do you think is what is a theme or a metaphor that you feel like you like to explore a lot when you're writing?
Um, I deal a lot with there's a few things that I notice that surface again and again. Sometimes really out there, sometimes a little more subtle. Uh, the idea of family comes up again and again, and family in the good context and in the negative context comes up again and again in my work. An idea of the idea of fate and 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 sort of fighting against that fate comes up again and again. And this idea lately, especially more than ever, and it's very easy to see why, I think, this idea of communication and a breakdown of communication. You mentioned the last book you'll ever read a few minutes ago, and that book, I mean, it's very it wears it on the sleeve that it's about this breakdown in communication that that honestly terrifies me right now.
With good reason.
Yeah.
There's the atmosphere at this party is getting a little tense.
No joke. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Um, so I'm just curious, how'd you how'd you manage during COVID? Like what were you writing during COVID or were you writing during, the dog days of quarantine?
Yeah, COVID changed things for me quite a bit
Okay.
in a number of ways. And in some professional ways and some personal ways. Because if you were to ask me before lockdown, I'd always have aspiring creators say, "How do I deal with writer's block?" And I was one of those guys who would say, "Oh, writer's block doesn't exist, and if you can't write, you might as well just get on out. There's no such thing." Um, and I realized what a terrible person I was to say that, because it does exist, and I'm never gonna really. I have no right to. Uh, it's a glass house when you start tearing people down for just being unable to go forward, because I've been there now and I get why people are there. Um, yeah, we had pencils down from almost every publisher. I was I was kind of lucky during COVID on the front that I had a publisher who came to me and wanted me to do a novella for them and was willing to pay a decent upfront rate for the novella. I had a couple of studios who wanted me to write animated features for them, and so that was helpful. Those didn't happen, they haven't happened yet, but the scripture certainly helped me get through the years. And yeah, I kept working on personal projects. I kept developing pitches. um I never stopped working. I definitely slowed down a little bit at times, but I was lucky that I had a couple of places that helped me get through, and and uh and I was lucky that it gave me a chance to work on develop some other ideas and other projects some of which have happened now and have gone forward, and some are still, in the works.
Yeah. So for all the things that you have to put a pin in, like about how many things are there on that board with pins in them?
I can count it because the
Oh
board's right.
wow. Oh, okay.
4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. There's 10, 11 things on the board right now that have pins in them.
Wow.
Yeah, I have
That's pretty
I have
good.
a, I have a bulletin board right over here that I use. Uh, I I used to use post-it notes, but now I have these magnetic post-it notes, and they
Mhm.
are absolutely game changers for me. And it's all, I spend at least a little bit every day shifting those notes around, erasing things off of them,
Yeah.
adding new things, moving them into different columns. Um, it kind of keeps me sane and uh, keeps me hopeful, because I think, during COVID was tough times. I don't necessarily think things have gotten any better in terms of avenues for publishing for me, and publishers that I can work with. And you have to deal with the publishers you can work with, the publishers you can't work with, and then beyond that is the publishing schedules, because those fill up very quickly, and publishers can only take so many projects in such a time frame. So I still think there's a lot of maneuvering. It's a maze that I'm still trying to find my way through, even after
Mhm.
all these years.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I sort of get the vibe like you're not a sit still guy. So
No, I have
yeah,
I have one speed, and it's uh except for those moments where things just crash down and I just can't do it. But other than that, I'm going at full speed, and
yeah.
I don't envision myself slowing down in that respect.
No, that's terrific. I mean, I'll be honest, lockdown actually did shut me off for about 5 or 6 months.
I can see. I mean, I get it. Like I said, it's uh there were some things happened that definitely threw me off my game.
Mm,
And that was the first time I found myself coming. I always would come down to my office, but there were definitely weeks, maybe months, where I would sit and just sit in my office doing nothing. And I have it was almost like lost time. I don't know what I was doing during that time,
mhm,
but I wasn't producing work.
mhm.
And yeah, it was I don't hold it against anybody that we all deal with that kind of stuff in our own way. And I'm
Yeah,
not gonna I'm not gonna tell anybody that their way of coping is the wrong way.
right. Yeah, well, I think Taika Waititi had something famously that he said about that. Sometimes writing is just opening up your laptop, staring at it for 8 hours, and then sighing sadly and closing it.
Yeah, I did a lot of that.
Yeah, yeah.
With naps, also with naps,
Naps.
lots of naps in the mix.
Yeah, naps are good. Again, my kids were school age kids, so there was a lot of homework and stuff, and not as much napping as I would have liked. But um, actually, another COVID related question, because I got into an interesting conversation with another guest on the show about how like a lot of people seem to have like a COVID uh work of art or literature or something that they kind of latched onto particularly, that sort of like you absorbed it so much it became part of your personality. Did you have anything like that, like an album that you had on repeat, or like uh,
You know, I don't know that I had any one thing. I know that I rewatched Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and I rewatched Angel, and I watched a lot of horror movies over and over again. And I watched The Office over, but The Office is a forever thing for me, because there's something about it that just cheers me up.
hmm,
I mean, just it's a fun show, but there's something about it that makes me happy, no matter how many times I watch it. So I watched that a lot. I don't know that I had any one thing that just. I think during COVID I did. I mean, this was a mistake. I rewatched Hannibal and the first season of True Detective, and I was like going back and forth between episodes. That was not
hmm,
the right
hmm.
move for me. That was a dark few weeks.
Yeah, yeah, I can imagine. um yeah, it was funny. Yeah, I had my thing. It was a little show on Netflix called Warrior Nun, which was
Oh
based
yeah.
off of that Ben Dunn comic.
Yeah.
Yeah, that sort of became part of my personality. I watched it about 15 times or something. And
Yeah,
yeah.
I'm always rewatching things and revisiting things. So I don't know that the things that always get me through helped
Mm,
get me through. So
mm,
uh those good friends were still there by my side.
yep, yep. What, are you reading anything now or consuming anything now, watching stuff, anything that you're
I
really
I
enjoying?
yeah, I just finished finally. I had to shift things around. I just finished Don't Fear the Reaper by Stephen Graham Jones, which
Mm,
is that book and the first book in the series, which is called My Heart is a Chainsaw. Um, they're so good. I mean, he's such a great writer. And I just finished this. That's the second book is Don't Fear the Reaper. And I just started How to Sell a Haunted House. And Yeah, I've been reading a lot of. I mostly these days I'm reading prose. I'm not. I still read comics. I'm not the guy that says I hate comics. It's just right now I'm gravitating more towards prose, and I've been reading a lot more of it. Uh, that said, my book cart that sits outside my office is packed full of books I haven't gotten to yet.
mm,
Um, so but yeah, I like that. I love Don't Fear the Reaper. If you haven't read Stephen Graham Jones, he's just a great writer. And I
mm,
also even recommend listening to him, listening just to reading it's fine, but listening to the afterwards of his books where he's describing his life and how he came to write Don't Fear the Reaper. It's just fun. It's kind of awesome to hear him talk about it
mm.
in his own words and in his own voice. Um, and if you like slasher, Don't Fear the Reaper and My Heart is the Chainsaw is interesting because if you like slashers, it's a slasher novel, but it's also almost uh, a history of the slasher genre in
Hmm.
in film. It's really interesting how he pulled that off
Hmm.
and still made an interesting wild ride of a book.
Hmm. Okay. I
And
will check.
also, Sadie Hartman just released a book called I'm gonna botch the title, but it's basically 100 books to read, 100 horror books to read before you die. And I've kind of thought, I mean, I've read a lot of them, but I kind of think I might do the challenge and just read all of the books in order from that
Wow.
from her dissertation on
Wow.
horror novels.
See, that's intense, but I know with my attention issues, like I'd make it through like half the book at best, and then like,
Yeah, I have a lot of those attention issues. Now, what's helped me is I like that I can get a book on Kindle and I can get the book on Audible. And if I listen to it while I'm driving, it advances my Kindle edition to the where I left off. So
nice.
I'm reading and I'm jumping back and forth. Um, I'm also currently rereading. I say rereading because I've read the first 6 or 7 of them. R.A. Salvatore back in the 90s or whenever it was wrote these novels based on the Dungeons and Dragons Forgotten Realms, and I remember reading them when I was in college and just loving them. So I decided to revisit them, and now I realize there's like 20 something in the series.
Oh
I've
my
read
God.
6, so we'll see if I can make it through 20 of them. But I'm rereading those right now.
So are those like official Dungeons and Dragons IP? Like,
Yeah, they were set in the Forgotten Realms, and he introduced a number of characters, but Dritz Duerden was his big character he created
mhm.
for those novels, and obviously a very enduring character. I mean, 20 something books later, Dritz is still going on adventures,
Ah,
and he's become one of the icons of of the Forgotten Realms, I guess.
hmm,
And now saying that, back to an earlier question, that's something that helped me get through COVID.
Yeah.
I had not played Dungeons and Dragons in many years. Not many, but at least a good 6 or 7 years.
Mhm.
And because of online, being able to play online and things like that, I was able to go back and play Dungeons and Dragons, and I did play with several games with people
Wow.
during that time because I could sit at home and still interact with people, and it was and it was it that really helped me get through a lot of it.
Okay. Well, I gotta, that's really funny actually, because my son, who's 17, um, got into DMing during COVID and,
Mm-hmm.
doing games over Zoom and Roll20 and whatever.
Yeah.
And that actually, because he created his own world with, what is now probably about a 500-page document full of lore. Um, and, he ended up writing his own books, which, he had to swap out some of the,
Sure.
IP terminology, but he just, it was his own world. So he could take that step off the edge of the world and, make it an original thing. And he's now finishing his third book in that
Wow.
world. Yeah.
That's really awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, playing those games are great. Uh, they help teach. They can teach a writer a lot of lessons. I don't feel like I ever. Yeah, I get stuck in stories. Like I'll write
Mhm.
myself into a corner many, every day. But I do credit, playing Dungeons and Dragons for all those years for helping me figure out how to, ad lib my way out of those corners to some, to some degree, because Dungeons and Dragons players love to try to put you in a corner when you're running your campaign.
Yeah. Yeah.
But no, that's awesome. 3 books is that's not that's no mean feat.
Nope.
That's a big deal,
Yeah. And he's
especially
so,
at that age. That's great.
yeah. Yeah. I mean, I keep saying to him, like, he gets so like wound up about productivity, and I'm like, dude,
Yeah, I
you're
think you're okay.
fine.
Yeah, I think you might be all right.
You're good, really. Like, I know adults who are very talented who don't produce at the rate you do. You're
Oh,
fine.
no, yeah, no. I wish I had been able to write 3 novels at, the age of 17, 18. That's dedication.
Yeah, well, it's just funny because actually what happened was he got tired of his players not going with the story that he wanted them to tell. He'd set up these meticulous dungeons, right?
Right.
And they would literally just Kool-Aid man their way through the walls. And he's like,
Yeah.
come on.
No, no, that's great. No, that's yeah, I don't think your son has anything to doesn't need to complain about productivity.
No, no. Um, so I want to also ask, I want to specifically talk about Harrow County now,
Mhm.
because I do love it. It is, um, I'm not Southern. I don't know what it is about the sort of Southern horror thing, like why I'm so attracted to it. And I don't want to unpack it because I feel like it'll take something away from it. I don't know.
Sure.
I
No,
don't care. I don't care why. I just know like that
yeah,
I
you
love it.
like what you like. Yeah.
Exactly. Um, but I want to know, well, I want to know a lot of things, but I wanted to know how much how much of that lore did you have when you started writing that first run?
Uh Maybe a decent amount, not maybe half of it, because
Mhm.
one of the things we did with Harrow County is I made up a lot of that stuff. Let's be very clear. I made it up with the intention that I wanted it to feel like real stories people might have heard along the way. So bits and pieces of it are taken from stories I heard when I was a kid, things that happened to me when I was a kid. But then I took it and kind of I pretzeled it into something else. But it was more important for me for it to feel like stories, folklore you might have heard, than for it to be real folklore. And I've been at signings and people have said, "Oh, I had that was the same story we used to tell when I was a kid." And I was like, it wasn't. It couldn't. I mean, I didn't tell them this, but it wasn't. Couldn't have been because, I mean, I guess it could have been, but I made it up. Whole cloth. I just, threw it in there because I wanted it to. But I kind of took pains to make it feel realistic. So bits of it are from my childhood and from the things that I had heard, but then I took it and kind of expanded it out and turned it into something else.
Yeah, well, and I mean, and it does succeed in feeling like something real.
Yeah, I mean, and that's little things that I had an uncle who used to tell me about haints all the time, so that's where that came from. And it's just so some of it's quote unquote real, and some of it's just as it's as real as real enough to cast a shadow.
Yeah. So are there stories about a skinless boy, or is that yours whole cloth?
Skinless boy was me whole cloth. There were bits and pieces of things that happened that I credit with creating the skinless boy. And I can, I know there are, depending on which book you read, there are essays I wrote about it. But when I was a kid, like 4 or 5, maybe pre-kindergarten, I don't know. We lived in this old farmhouse, and I was standing at a window above the sink in the kitchen, and I watched this guy crawl out from under our house, and he went up to the apple tree just out behind the house, and he picked an apple, and he crawled back under the house. And the way he crawled, I mean, first of all, it's just really weird that a dude was under our house eating our apples, but the way he crawled kind of inspired the Skinless Boys crawling. And I cut my hand really bad when I was in middle school, and I remember the skin, it was on a joiner, which is a machine that planes your wood, and it just took all the skin off my hand. And I remember I lifted my hand up, and it looked like a glove hanging off my wrist, and I could see the red of my hand, and that has always stuck with me. The red meaty hand there, and that's part of it, I think. And yeah, I just, and then I don't know where the concept of the skin talking to the body and seeing things through the eyes of the body and things like that. I'm not sure where that came from, but there weren't stories of the Skinless Boys much as just things I
synthesized kind of.
That I remembered, that I pulled into that I chimeraed into this thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, Skinless Boy was kind of made up.
Okay. How about the flaming skeletons?
They were, so I have to give all credit on the flaming skeletons to Tyler Crook, because as I wrote them the first time, they were just ghosts standing on the side of the road or whatever, or in the woods. And Tyler really wanted to bring some pop and some new color to the page. So he said, is it okay if I make them flaming in this weird, this flaming this flaming color? And of course it was fine. And so the flaming skeletons, I have to give all credit to Tyler, because they were just haints originally. And then the way he envisioned them became this flaming creature.
Right. And okay. I have to ask about Priscilla. Did you base her character on somebody? Like, she's got a pretty sassy personality.
She's like most characters, I think she's, bits and pieces of people I knew. Again, I kind of, Emmy's the same way. She's pieces of different people I knew over the years. Priscilla's the same way. She's little bits and pieces of people I met over the years. She was never intended to be more than, she was only going to appear in one issue of the comic. And I liked her so much, and Tyler liked her so much, that we decided she had to start showing up and being more of a character. And then, there's a family of goblins that show up throughout Harrow County, and those are all these sort of numbskulls that that well-meaning numbskulls, but numbskulls all the while that I knew. Again, they were people I had encountered mostly in
Mm,
elementary school and junior high and high school.
okay. Um, Now I'm curious. Did you know that Malachi was going to become such a popular like breakout character? Because
I,
people love him.
I knew people would like the look of the abandoned, and I knew people would dig that character. I didn't know they'd like him as much as a character, as more than something that's just like this big, brooding, monstrous thing.
Mhm.
Um, I always liked uh Malachi, and again, that's one. The abandon was always meant to be in the series throughout, but the Malachi of it all
Mhm.
is something that kind of surfaced as the series progressed, and it became something much. He became the abandon became something much different before the series ended. Obviously,
Mm.
um, the original concept was just, it was just the this creature, this monster that had been left behind, and somewhere along the way I realized there's much more to the character than that, and
Mm.
I wanted to really dig in, and I feel like we came up with a really cool sort of story for the character, and yeah, it just that element is something that kind of surfaced out of nowhere in during the process of writing one of the scripts.
Mm. So, how much of a visual did you have in your head for him
Oh,
when you were writing? Like, how much did you know about what he was going to look like?
I that one was pretty much fully formed in my mind
Mm.
when I was writing the script, and I haven't looked at the first script in a while, or
Mm.
any of the pitch document or planning documents, but I would I knew what that creature looked like, from the size to the number of eyes to the horn. Everything about it I had in my mind, and
Mm.
Tyler just brought it to life in amazing detail. But that's one I definitely had a description for, and
Mm.
I don't always. Sometimes it'll be in broad strokes, or
Mhm.
some, this is a creature that looks feral and gigantic, but for the abandoned I had a very clear picture in my head.
Is it easier to do that, to kind of just do stuff in broad strokes when you're working with an artist that you sort of know already and you know they're gonna, you can rely on them to do something that's in line with what you are thinking?
It's comics is all about collaboration
Mm.
and trust, and I especially with someone like Tyler or Brian Hurd, who I've worked with years and for years and years, I kind of know, I have a good idea what I'm going to get in
Mm.
some cases, and sometimes I want to be surprised, and I like that element of surprise, but there are times where I'm very very clear on, oh, for instance, the Haints. That
Mm.
was, I just said, here's some ghostly figures. Tyler surprised me by what he did with the flames and everything in an awesome way. But there are some times where, like with the abandoned, it's so it's so clear in my head what it needs to be. Then yes, I'll describe it. And most of the time, my collaborators can see that. When
Mm.
I write something like that, and I'm like, here's what it looks like in this, and I put that much detail into it, and that much description.
Mm.
I think most of my collaborators know when it's important to me,
Yeah.
just like I know when things are important to them, when and in terms of how they draw these characters. I don't typically, my scripts are, I see scripts that are like every panel is just a couple of words or one line of description. Mine are a little more detailed than that, because I want to evoke something. I want as far as I'm concerned, the artist is the first reader, so I want them to enjoy reading the scripts, But I also don't write, Alan Moore famously writes pages and pages and pages to describe one panel. And I
Mm.
don't go that far either.
Yeah, well, at that point, it's like maybe just draw it yourself. Like
Yeah,
at some
yeah.
point, like
Look, I can't deny the results. When Saga of the Swamp Thing
mm,
is one of my favorite comics, and then I look at the scripts, I'm like, oh wow, he really went for it on writing these scripts. But he got the results that that he was after.
yeah. Well, it's just funny because it's so like it's different with like screenwriting, for example. Like they really don't want you to do that.
No, no, they don't. And that was the tough habit for me to break, in the the screenplays I've written.
Mm,
And I wrote one of the pilot versions of Harrow County when we were taking it out last time for television, and it took me a little bit to dial back on some of that description I was loading in there, and that
mhm.
was my learning curve, is pulling that stuff back a little bit.
Yeah, it's hard to do. Like,
Yeah.
my first couple screenplays, I would get feedback like, okay, you're clearly a novelist. You have to like,
Yeah. Right. Yeah, they're different, very different mediums, and they definitely take different skill sets, all of them.
hmm
Prose, comics,
hmm
screenplays,
yep,
plays, it's all very they all have their quirks.
absolutely. But I mean, for me at least, I like all of them. Like, I don't feel like it would be fair to ask me to choose one.
It's not fair. It's not fair for to ask anybody to choose one.
No,
There's things I like about each of those different mediums.
yeah. Well, I imagine for you it's the same as me. It's like each one sort of hits something different.
They did, yeah, for sure.
What for you, like what is the sort of main thing that you love about doing screenplay versus comic format or
Um,
novel format?
you know, screenplays are screenplays for me have sort of a sense of urgency, and they write themselves relatively quickly. There's a rapidness, and it's sort of a uh, it's like a sprint. It's an adrenaline rush in a lot of ways.
Mm,
Um, Comics, it's all for me. Comics are. I'm a very impatient person, and I like to see some sort of return for the work. I want either, I don't like writing things that people aren't going to read. Even if, I want people to read what I'm writing. And comic books give me that very quickly. I write a script.
mm,
I'm starting to see artwork relatively fast. I'm starting to get, I'm getting
mm,
emails of, here's a page based on what I wrote, and look how beautiful it is.
mm,
And then comics actually publish very rapidly too, compared to almost everything. Definitely compared to prose and screenplays. Comics
mm,
come out very quickly.
mm,
Um, so there's that, the collaboration, and sort of that instant return is what really keeps me in comics more than anything.
mm,
And then prose, I just like that I can. It's the opposite. I love the collaboration of comics. In prose, I love that it's all me, and
mm,
this is what I want, and it's all me there, and I like that sense of I'm gonna stand or fall on what I'm doing.
mm. For me, I feel like the other thing, or one of the big things I like about prose versus other formats is there's like you get to breathe more. There's like you can spend a few minutes with a character fapping around doing whatever
For
because
sure.
it's because you feel it shows something important or
Yeah.
you know.
That it's something you don't really have that luxury in comic books, especially. Comics are all about economy,
Hmm.
because you're so limited by, the number of issues in a series, the number of pages in a
Hmm.
book, the number of panels on the page. I
Hmm.
mean, it's all about really budgeting what you do. And in my comics, I more than anything else, they're outline, outline, outline. I mean, they are super outlined before I can actually write that script. Otherwise, I'm going to get into a lot of trouble.
Hmm. So like, all right, so what's the process like? Do you sort of come up with like the general story outline and then you kind of break it down page by page and panel by panel, or how do you think about it?
So I go through so yeah, I come up with the general, the idea. This is, like a one sentence. This is what I'm going to have happen in
Mm,
this issue, so to
mm,
speak, or series or whatever. And then I do a very high level outline that really looks a lot like, it'll say they fight, they run, they talk. It's very, very high level. And then I take that. The next step is I break down every scene I think needs to happen in an issue.
mm,
And I do that first without assigning a number of pages to it. So I'll break down every scene and then I go back and I look at it and say, okay, this scene's going to take 2 pages and this one's going to take 4 and this one's going to take 3. And then I realize, and then I add it all up and realize I've outlined, 60 pages for a 22-page comic. So
mm,
then I have to go back and I have to cut things and I have to move things around, save something for another issue, uh, compress. And that's where the real work takes place for me, is that compression and figuring out what can fit and what doesn't need to be in there. uh what babies you got to throw out, throw out into the wild.
mm,
And then I do one more outline. After I've done that, I do one more outline that is very much a page by page, panel by panel. This is what's going to happen on that in this comic.
mm.
And an artist could take that final outline and draw a full comic based on it. The only thing it really doesn't have is, dialogue and things like that. So that's the outline I take, this beat by beat outline I take, and I write a full script based on that outline.
Mm.
So yeah, there's a lot of, for me, the vast majority of work takes place in the outline on a comic. The script, by the time I get to a script, it's a breeze because I know exactly what's going to happen on every
Mm,
panel.
mm. So are you in your office right now?
I am, yeah.
That is a pretty cool looking office space. I feel like I see some Funkos back there, and
There's a yeah, it's kind of, I call it it looks like a haunted flea market. It's just a bunch, honestly, it's just a bunch of junk. And there are more shelves over here that are full of junk and dusty junk. Yeah, toys, and a lot of them are very old and broken, but they're just things that anything that I feel kind of inspires me,
mm,
and things that I just, there's a lot of nostalgia on those shelves.
sure.
But yeah, it's just stuff I like to look at and sometimes it makes me feel like a kid again just looking at it.
Can you share a favorite?
Oh, it's there's a lot of cool Godzillas that I like up there, and I remember there's this little guy up here somewhere, um, which was a dumb little toy I had when I was a kid. Not dumb, but this little guy, he's a he was from a line called the Adventure People.
Okay.
And the Adventure People were, for the most part, all real world toys. There was the firefighter and the police
Mm,
officer and the mailman and then at some point, I guess right after Star Wars came out, they decided to make science fiction
mm.
characters. And this was a little guy. His name was Clawtron. And
Clawtron.
And the neat thing about Adventure People were they had no story.
Hmm.
The only story for Clawtron was he's a dude with claws. That's it. There was no story. And I made up just so many stories about Clawtron. And, I never, as a little kid, I never played with my Star Wars action figures or I never played Star Wars. I always made up different stories for the characters and different things those characters are doing. And, a lot of that, to me, that's part of storytelling. And it's baked into my DNA of telling stories. And a lot of that I credit to good old Clawtron here for not having a
backstory.
A backstory or a cartoon.
Wow. I don't know, man. I think I want those Clawtron comics now.
Well, look, if I could ever find out, I would probably bare knuckle brawl somebody for a Clawtron comic. I don't. But yeah, that's finding out who's chasing the rights on Fisher Price's Adventure People.
Mm.
There's fans for everything, though.
It's true. It's true. The fandoms are, you would not believe what there are fandoms for. I have a friend actually who recently joined a fandom group for the Scarecrow and Mrs. King. Do you remember that?
Oh, I remember. I was always disappointed that it wasn't an actual scarecrow. I was like, I wanted it to be a scarecrow because wow, now I really see. Now I want a Scarecrow Mrs. King pastiche, but it is really a scarecrow.
Right, exactly. It's just this lady running around the rural environment with, solving mysteries with a scarecrow.
Oh yeah, I think there's magic there for somebody.
Oh, man. All right, so I feel like we've got at least like 2 or 3 new comics coming out of this conversation. So
yeah, well, that's everybody asks where ideas come from, and a lot of times it's just these these dumb concepts that come up in these conversations.
mm-hmm. Yep, and next thing you know, you're down a rabbit hole.
Oh yeah, there is no doubt in my mind that at least a couple of years down the line, an idea for Scarecrow and Mrs. King with a real scarecrow is going to pop right back into my head. I'm like, did anybody do that yet? Because they should have.
Cool. So we're coming up on time. I usually do a little speed round at the end.
Sure. Okay.
So we're gonna do that. Starts with some easy questions, and then we'll get a little weird.
Oh, all right. Let's do it.
All right. Okay. Tea or coffee?
Coffee.
Super salad?
Salad.
Venom or Carnage?
Venom, but Agent Venom.
Agent Venom. Fair enough. If you could pick a superpower, what would you pick?
I really like the idea of Wolverine's regeneration because he can live forever, and I more and more I don't want to die.
That's valid. That's valid. Which Harrow County character would you want with you if you were stuck on a desert island?
Oh, well, Emmy can pretty much do almost anything. So, well, when she has her powers, she's pretty powerful. She could get me off that desert island.
That's true.
I know I wouldn't want Levi on the island with me because he'd start considering me a long pig to be eaten, and I'm not down with that.
How about at a table full of lawyers?
Which Harrow County character would I want with me? Cammy, hands down, Cammy. I think she could hold her own in that group very easily.
Okay. High stakes blackjack table.
Ooh. I kind of feel like Bernice might be pretty good at a high stakes table. I think she's got the practicality and the sense of being able to take risks when you need to take risks. I think that's her.
Okay. All right. Last one. Which one would you most likely make awkward excuses to not hang out with?
Oh, well, I kind of feel like that's probably Cammy as well. I mean, I don't really want to. I mean, I feel like she's the life of the party until but she's also like, it's a real dangerous party.
Absolutely. All right. Well, I am going to wrap it up. Thank you so much. So that's it. That's our show, you beautiful nerds. I've been your host, Jen Jackalone. Hit like and subscribe if you enjoyed this chat, and check out the links in the description to keep up with what Cullen is up to and support the incredible work he's doing. We got more brain food coming your way, so for best results, insert in brain. Stay hydrated, nerds. Take care, take it easy, and stay geeky.